When you hear that someone your age has won the lottery, do you call it luck or a curse? That is the question people whispered about me in the weeks after my story began. Some said a woman nearing 70 should not be burdened with sudden wealth. Others said it was fate rewarding years of sacrifice. For me, it started with a single envelope sliding under my front door. My name is Marjorie Carter. I am 69 years old. I spent my life as an accountant in Detroit, working long hours balancing other people's numbers and saving every penny to keep my family secure. I had lived alone for nearly a decade in the same wooden house on the east side of Detroit. The boards creaked with every winter wind. The porch steps sagged but still held me steady when I watered the potted plants each morning. I lived frugally as accountants do. My late husband, William, had passed away 9 years earlier. Since then, my life had been simple. Grocery store visits on Tuesday's church, rummage sales once a month, and the ritual of tea in the chipped porcelain cup he left behind. On that Saturday, I had gone to the corner market to pick up milk and bread. At the register, I spotted a display of bright scratch-off tickets. I had never bought one before. I told the cashier, "Just for fun, add one." It was a whim, nothing more. That whim turned into a number printed in bold black ink, a number that matched the winning announcement on the evening news, $1.2 million. I did not scream. I did not jump. I sat at my kitchen table and folded the ticket back into my wallet. A lifetime of balancing books had trained me that money could build or destroy depending on who held it. My instinct was not to celebrate, but to breathe. Silence, I told myself, would be my shield. 2 days later, the envelope appeared. Cream-colored, thick official. On its top corner was the embossed logo of the Michigan State Lottery. It slid under the door with a sound like a blade across the floor. I stared at it for a long moment, the chipped teacup warm in my hand. My heart did not race, but my palms dampened. I had seen enough contracts in my career to know that paper can own you before you even read the words. I bent down, picked it up, and studied the seal. A mix of dread and awe sat heavy on my chest. When I broke it open, the letter inside confirmed what I already knew but had not allowed myself to feel. The numbers matched. The ticket was valid. The check was coming. For most people, that might have been a turning point of joy. For me, it was a turning point of vigilance, because I also knew the phone would ring, and I was right. The landline, the same one I had kept since the 90s, shrilled across the room. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. My hand shook as I lifted the receiver. A familiar voice filled my ear. "Mom, it's Darius." My son had not called me in 9 months. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, like a salesman who had memorized his pitch. He asked how I was doing, whether I needed groceries, whether the roof was still leaking. I answered politely, but inside my chest, alarm bells rang. An adult son does not call out of nowhere without a reason. That evening, I sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. I held the cream envelope in my lap, its weight heavier than gold. That was when my neighbor, Samuel, walked over. He was a retired mail carrier who had lived 2 doors down since the 70s. He carried a small jar of honey from the hives he kept in his backyard. "Marjorie," he said gently. Placing the jar in my hand, "I heard you weren't feeling well last week. Thought you could use something sweet." It was a small gesture, yet it pierced me. Because in that moment, with my own blood about to circle like vultures, it reminded me that not all care is conditional. Some people give simply because they choose to. His words, his honey, told me I was still seen. I thanked him and set the jar on the railing. The golden liquid caught the last ray of sunlight, glowing like a promise. I thought of the irony. Strangers and neighbors often give you kindness that family withholds. I wondered how much of that truth I had ignored over the years, believing loyalty could be assumed just because of shared DNA. Inside, the phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Later that night, when I replayed the message, it was Darius again. This time, his words were direct. "Mom, I'm coming by tomorrow. I have something important we need to talk about." I knew what was coming. I had read enough human faces, balanced enough troubled accounts to recognize the pattern. Wealth attracts not only attention, but entitlement. I set the phone down, rinsed the teacup, and whispered to myself, "Stay quiet. Stay steady." I did not sleep much that night. The creaks of the house felt louder than usual. Shadows stretched long across the walls. I thought about William. He used to say the numbers never lie, but people will. I wondered what he would say now, seeing his son circle back only when the numbers had changed. At dawn, I walked to the mailbox. Bills, advertisements, the ordinary clutter of life. But the cream envelope remained the most important piece of paper in the house. I tucked it into a file folder labeled Personal, locked it inside the cabinet, and placed the key under the porcelain teacup. My small act of defiance, a ritual of protection. As I poured honey into my morning tea, Samuel's jar caught the light again. It reminded me that even in betrayal, there are anchors of kindness. I sipped slowly, steadying myself for the visit that was surely coming. The next day, just as the clock struck noon, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Darius stood there. In his hands, he held a pie box. His smile was wide, his cologne strong, his eyes too eager, and that I realized was how the game would begin. The next day arrived with the kind of spring air that should have smelled of lilacs and cut grass, but all I could smell was anticipation. I had not forgotten the voicemail. Darius had said he was coming by, and when he said important, I knew exactly what kind of conversation he wanted. At noon, sharp footsteps echoed on the porch. The knock was too cheerful, too rehearsed. I opened the door to find Darius holding a pie box plastic lid, still fogged supermarket sticker, glaring. It wasn't pie, it was performance. The smell of pumpkin hit my nose even before I noticed the detail that mattered most. The pie still carried its plastic lid and a bright supermarket sticker. It had not even cooled fully. Condensation fogged the inside of the box. It was May, nowhere near Thanksgiving, and my son had never once baked in his life. "Mom," he said with a wide smile, "I thought I'd bring you something sweet. Sweet." The word landed heavy like a coin dropped in a tin can. I let him in. He set the pie down on the kitchen table right where William and I used to balance our ledgers. For a moment I could almost see my husband there, pen tapping against the chipped teacup, watching the scene unfold. Darius pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. His cologne filled the room, sharp and chemical, stinging my nose. He reached into his leather briefcase and slid out a folder thick with papers. "I've been thinking," he said, smoothing his tie. "You shouldn't have to worry about things anymore. Not bills, not accounts, not taxes. I can handle all that for you." His hand rested on the folder like it was a gift, but the word printed on the top betrayed him. Trustee. I looked at it. A lifetime of accounting had trained me to see numbers behind words, motives behind gestures. I knew what a trust could do in the right hands, and I knew what it could do in the wrong ones. He was not offering comfort. He was offering control. "Mom," he pressed, "all you'd have to do is sign. It would make everything easier. Easier. For whom?" I sipped my tea, now lukewarm, and said nothing. I watched him. The way his eyes flicked to the cabinet where I had locked the envelope. The way his leg tapped nervously under the table. His smile was polished, but it was the kind of smile that reminded me of bathwater, warm on the surface, stagnant underneath. "Think about it," he urged. "I've already filled in the details. You won't have to lift a finger." My throat tightened, but not from fear, from memory. William's voice came back to me calm and steady. He used to say, "Never sign what you haven't read. Paper can be a leash or it can be a shield." The words floated across my mind like a lifeline. Healing sometimes comes not in hugs, but in echoes of wisdom that refuse to die. I set my cup down and folded my hands in my lap. "Darius," I said evenly, "leave the folder. I'll review it." Relief flashed across his face. He thought he had won. He pushed the folder toward me and stood brushing invisible dust off his sleeve. "I'll call tomorrow," he said, patting my shoulder like a man sealing a deal. When the door closed behind him, the air felt thicker. I stared at the pie condensation dripping down the inside of the lid. It sat like a bribe poorly wrapped as kindness. I had seen this strategy before, not from family, but from clients who wanted to bury debts under false smiles. I opened the folder. Page after page of legal jargon already filled in with his name. Spaces for my signature left blank waiting. He had not even left room for my questions. I closed it, slid it into the cabinet with the cream envelope, and locked it again. This time I tucked the key not under the teacup but under the honey jar Samuel had given me. A new anchor, a reminder that kindness existed outside the bloodline. That night, as I washed the teacup and watched the water bead along the crack, I thought about the question society never answers honestly. When children push legal papers in front of aging parents, is it love disguised as responsibility, or is it greed disguised as care? Too often the line is blurred, and by the time the truth emerges, the signature has already trapped the hand that wrote it. I sat in the quiet kitchen long after dark, the pie untouched, the scent of nutmeg lingering. My son thought silence meant weakness. He did not know silence could also mean preparation. Before bed, I jotted notes in a small ledger I had kept since William passed. Dates, phone calls, the pie. I recorded it all. It was an old habit, but it steadied me. Paper, after all, could tell a story long after voices twisted it. When I finally lay down, I did not pray for wealth or even safety. I prayed for clarity, the kind that keeps you from mistaking bribes for gifts, pressure for love, or control for care. The next morning, the pie sat untouched, condensation dripping like sweat down its lid. The phone rang. Naomi's voice poured through syrupy but sharp. "Any good news lately?" And just like that, sweetness curdled into threat. The pie still sat on my kitchen counter the next morning untouched. I had no appetite for it. Instead, I brewed my tea and opened the curtains wide enough to let in the sun. My son had left behind more than a dessert. He had left behind a warning. Papers disguised as care pressure, disguised as love. It did not take long for the circle to tighten further. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the doorbell. On the porch sat a bouquet of lilies and roses arranged in a vase with a tag that read, "From Naomi." A card rested beside it. In cursive handwriting, she had written, "Thinking of you and your future. We should all plan together soon." Naomi had never once sent me flowers in the 15 years she had been married to my son. She had never even remembered my birthday without Kayla reminding her. The sudden sweetness smelled stronger than the lilies. It reeked of strategy. The phone rang minutes later. This time it was an email notification, my old desktop chiming in the corner. I shuffled over and opened it. Naomi again. The subject line read, "Your well-being." Inside were sentences about how the future could be uncertain, how aging can cause decline, how she and Darius only wanted what was best. She mentioned terms like guardianship, conservatorship, and long-term care. Her tone was syrupy, the kind that coats the tongue but leaves a bitter aftertaste. I leaned back in my chair and let the words wash over me. Guardianship, conservatorship. Those were not the words of a loving daughter-in-law. They were legal tools, sharp and heavy, the kind that could strip a person of their voice. I remembered last winter when I slipped on ice and fractured my hip. I had lain in the hospital for 3 nights. Neither Darius nor Naomi had come. Not a call. Not a visit. It had been Kayla who showed up clutching my hand, promising me she would not let me face it alone. Now suddenly they were so worried about my future. That afternoon, Kayla herself stopped by. She brought a handwritten card decorated with small doodles of coffee mugs and hearts. Inside, she invited me to brunch at her apartment that weekend. Her words were innocent, but her eyes carried weight when she said softly, "Grandma, please be careful." I hugged her. She smelled of lavender shampoo, and I felt tears sting my eyes. Healing sometimes arrives in the smallest gestures, like a card from a granddaughter who knows more than she says. When she left, I walked back to the kitchen. My gaze fell on the trash can. Buried in the trash was a crookedly printed page ink, sliding off the margin. At the top, bold and merciless, "Get doctor's note. Fast." Lies had a font now, and it spelled my erasure. The rest of the draft was fragmented sentences, mental capacity, declining memory, evidence. My hands tightened around the paper. This was no mistake. They were preparing to paint me as unstable. I pressed the wrinkled page flat against the table. My heart pounded, but I was not broken. Fear had walked into my house before. This time, I chose not to let it stay. I went to the closet, pulled out the small voice recorder William had once used for dictating notes, and placed it on the counter. I pressed record. I began to speak aloud, documenting the flowers, the emails, the card, and the draft I had found. My own voice filled the quiet room, steady and deliberate. In that moment, I felt control return. Healing does not always come from winning. Sometimes it comes from preparing. Every word I recorded was a shield being built brick by brick. By evening, the air felt heavier. I set the bouquet outside on the porch where the night air could take away the artificial sweetness. I did not want it perfuming my home. I brewed another cup of tea, added a spoonful of Samuel's honey, and sat by the window. It was nearly midnight when a sound jolted me awake, a knock faint but persistent at the front door. I slipped my robe on and walked slowly down the hallway. The porch light cast long shadows. When I opened the door, it was Nora, my neighbor. Her face looked pale under the yellow bulb. "They said you were unstable," she whispered, glancing nervously at the dark street. I froze. "Who said that?" I asked quietly. "Darius and Naomi?" She answered almost apologetically. "They were talking outside their car earlier. They said you were losing it, that you might not be safe living alone." Her words cut deeper than the draft in my hand, because this was not just paper anymore. This was the spreading of poison seeping into the neighborhood, preparing the ground before the strike. I closed the door and leaned against it, breath shallow. I picked up the recorder again and pressed record. My voice shook at first, then steadied. Day 3. Flowers arrived from Naomi. Email followed. Draft found in trash. Nora reports they are saying, "I am unstable." I set the recorder down and poured one last cup of tea. The honey swirled golden in the water. I lifted the chipped cup, the same one William had once tapped his pencil against, and whispered to myself, "They think silence is surrender. But silence is the beginning of my defense." The night outside pressed close, but inside I held on to my ritual. Tea paper record. 3 anchors. And for the first time since the cream envelope slid under my door, I did not feel like prey. I felt like someone preparing for battle. The morning it arrived, I knew even before I picked it up. The envelope was thicker than the others, heavy with intent. When I slid it open, the smell of printer ink hit me first. Then my eyes fell on the words I had feared yet expected, "Petition for conservatorship." At the bottom, glaring like a wound, was a bright red court stamp, the kind you cannot peel away. I sat at the kitchen table, the petition spread before me like a verdict already written. The name in bold as petitioner, Darius Carter. Witness, Naomi Carter. My own children had carried me into court without my consent. My hands trembled as I traced the edges of the paper. I had balanced ledgers worth millions in my years as an accountant, but this one sheet felt heavier than all of them combined. It was not numbers. It was my identity, my autonomy, and with a single order, they were trying to erase it. I poured tea, though my hand shook so much that a few drops spilled onto the page, blurring a word. It hardly mattered. Their intent was already clear. The legal system meant to protect the vulnerable could just as easily be turned into a weapon. That question gnawed at me. Was the court truly a place of justice, or just another stage where power decided the outcome? For the elderly, especially women like me, how often did it become a machine to silence rather than protect? I could not sit in fear. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had written years ago in case of emergency. Sonia Patel. She had been recommended by an old colleague, sharp, relentless, and most importantly, ethical. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Carter. What's going on?" My voice cracked as I told her about the petition. I tried to remain calm, but the words spilled out unevenly like coins tumbling across a floor. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she was silent for a beat. Then she said firmly, "Marjorie, they want to bury you in silence. We will let the paperwork speak." Relief flooded me at those words, not because the battle was won, but because I no longer felt alone in the trenches. She told me to bring everything I had, the pie, the emails, the draft, the recorder. Every scrap matters, she said. The law respects paper trails more than tears. When I hung up, I felt a sliver of strength return. Healing sometimes comes not in grand gestures, but in knowing someone believes you still matter. Sonia's voice had reminded me of that. That evening, Kayla came by again. She had her phone in hand, cheeks flushed with anger. "Grandma, look." She showed me a video uploaded to TikTok. The caption read, "Crazy Grandma thinks the lottery made her invincible." In the clip, Naomi's voice mocked me, imitating my quiet mannerisms, while Darius laughed in the background. Kayla's eyes welled with tears. "They're trying to make you look insane before the hearing." I touched her cheek. "Let them laugh. We have truth, and truth leaves trails." She nodded, though her hand still trembled. I knew the cruelty cut her as deeply as it did me. Later that night, I placed the petition on my dining table. I studied every line, every clause. They had claimed I was no longer capable of managing finances, that I had made erratic decisions with my winnings, that my memory lapses put me at risk. They even listed examples for getting groceries, double paying a bill, leaving the porch light on during the day. Small mistakes, ordinary slips of aging twisted into evidence of incompetence. I pressed record again. Day 4. Petition for conservatorship received. Filed by my son, Darius Carter. Witness Naomi Carter. Allegations memory loss, financial mismanagement. Stamp dated May 12th. Read. My voice wavered but steadied with each fact. I remembered William again, his calm words, as he reconciled accounts late at night. "Numbers don't lie, Marjorie, but people can. Keep your paper. It will outlive their words." The clock ticked past midnight. My home felt both fortress and cage. I rose, checked the locks, then sat again at the table. The chipped cup warmed my hands. Across from me, the petition waited a declaration of betrayal in black and white. In the silence, I thought of the larger world. How many others sat in kitchens just like mine, staring at documents that claimed to protect them? How many signatures had stolen lives under the guise of care? It was not just my fight. It was a question for society itself. Should the courts have such unchecked power to erase the will of the living? I closed my eyes and breathed deep. I was not just a mother betrayed. I was a woman standing against a system that could strip me of myself. The next morning, I dressed deliberately. I chose the navy cardigan William had always said made me look steady. I placed the petition in a folder alongside the draft email, the flowers card, the recorder, my arsenal. At Sonia's office, the walls smelled faintly of sandalwood. She motioned for me to sit. Her eyes scanned the petition quickly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She reached across the desk, laid her hand on mine, and said again, "We will let the paperwork speak." The warmth of her touch steadied me more than any medicine could. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. Healing. I realize sometimes begins with another person's conviction. I left her office lighter, though the fight had only begun. Outside, the city hummed with indifference, cars rushing, strangers passing. None of them knew the storm brewing inside a small kitchen table petition. But I knew, and I was ready. When I returned home that evening, I placed the petition back in the drawer beneath Samuel's honey jar, not hidden, stored, waiting for the day it would rise in court as evidence not of my weakness, but of their greed. I brewed my tea once more, tapped the chipped rim with my finger, and whispered to the empty room, "You tried to erase me with ink, but ink can defend as well as destroy." The red stamp glared up at me from the page. To them, it was victory. To me, it was only the beginning. The morning of the so-called family meeting, I woke earlier than usual. I brewed tea, but it tasted of metal instead of comfort. Something in me knew that this day would leave scars. I laid out 3 cups on the kitchen counter, not for hospitality, but for staging. The table had always been where William and I reconciled accounts. Today, it would be where I recorded betrayal. The question had been circling in my mind, was it survival or was it trespass? Planting a hidden camera in my own kitchen, was it self-defense or was I crossing a moral line? The courts were already being twisted against me. Would they twist this too? Claim I had violated privacy? But then I thought of the petition, the red stamp, the mockery online. If I remained passive, their lies would grow roots. So I made my decision. I reached up to the spice shelf, slid the small oregano jar forward, and nestled behind it the mini camera I had ordered months ago, back when Kayla had worried about intruders. Its light blinked, once then went dark. From that vantage point, it captured the entire table. Even the sound was sharp enough to catch the clink of a spoon against porcelain. By the time the doorbell rang, the cups were steaming. I inhaled once deeply and opened the door. Darius stood with shoulders squared, piecing together the mask of concern he had worn before. Naomi was beside him, immaculate as always, the scent of her perfume filling the air like a wall. And trailing them was a man in a gray suit. Their lawyer. They called it a family meeting, but it was an ambush. We sat at the table. I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon striking the cup with a deliberate rhythm. The camera would capture it all. Darius cleared his throat. "Mom, we're not here to fight. We just want to make sure you're safe. This trust document is for your peace of mind." He slid a stack of papers across the table. His tone was soft, but the weight of the demand pressed heavy. I did not answer. I lifted the cup, sipped, and set it down carefully. The sound of porcelain against wood echoed in the room. Naomi leaned forward. "We've been researching, and this is standard. Everyone does it. It's not about control, it's about relief. Relief." The word hung in the air like smoke. Relief for whom? Certainly not for me. I kept my silence. The years of being an accountant had taught me that not every discrepancy needs immediate correction. Sometimes you let the numbers pile until the truth becomes undeniable. Darius grew impatient. His smile faltered, his jaw tightened. "Mom, you need to sign this. Otherwise, mistakes will keep happening. Bills double paid, lights left on. We're trying to prevent a crisis before it starts." The lawyer finally spoke. "Mrs. Carter, this is in your best interest. Conservatorships are protective, not punitive." My chest tightened. Protective. That word again weaponized. I wanted to shout that I had survived poverty, widowhood, broken bones, and still managed my life without their protection. But I held my tongue. Instead, I let the silence speak, while the camera recorded every syllable, every smirk, every push of paper across the table. Naomi reached out as if to touch my hand, then thought better of it. "Think of Kayla," she said. "She needs stability, and we can't provide it if we're always worried about you." For the first time, my lips parted. "Kayla needs honesty, not theater," I said quietly. The lawyer frowned. Darius's face flushed. Naomi sat back, eyes narrowing. At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I slid it out under the table. A message from Kayla lit up the screen. "They're planning faster than you think. Be careful." I felt a surge of warmth. In the middle of betrayal, a thread of loyalty. Healing sometimes arrives not as a cure, but as a small light refusing to extinguish. I tucked the phone away and sipped again. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than if I had argued. Darius pushed the documents closer. "Mom, please, sign. Today." I tilted my head. "Why the rush?" He hesitated, glanced at Naomi. "It's better to finalize while everything is calm." Calm. The room felt anything but calm, yet I forced my shoulders to stay level. I wanted the recording to show not just their words, but my composure. After 40 minutes of circling, they finally stood. The papers remained unsigned. Their lawyer gathered them with stiff fingers. Naomi's eyes darted to the spice rack as if she sensed something, but she said nothing. They left with polite words that rang hollow. I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. My pulse still hammered, but beneath it was satisfaction. I walked to the spice shelf, retrieved the camera, and set it on the counter. The tiny red light blinked once to confirm. Evidence secured. I replayed a snippet. The spoon striking the cup. Darius's voice pressing me to sign. Naomi's rehearsed reassurances. Every detail etched in sound and image. The clink of porcelain might seem trivial, but it proved the authenticity of the recording. No one could claim it was fabricated. I wrote in my journal, Day 5. Meeting with Darius, Naomi, and their lawyer. Papers pushed. Refused to sign. Hidden camera captured all. Kayla's text warning. Hope alive. As night fell, I placed the camera in a drawer beside William's old pocket knife. Tools of defense, both silent. I brewed one more cup of tea sweetened with Samuel's honey and sat on the porch. The air was cool, the street quiet. I let the weight of the day settle into my bones. I looked at the stars. Betrayal had visited my table, but so had hope. And for now, that balance was enough to keep me steady. I had always believed betrayal hurt most when it came from blood. That was before Nora. Nora had lived across the street for 20 years. We exchanged pies during holidays, watched each other's mail when the other traveled, and spoke of our aching knees and rising grocery prices while standing in our yards. I thought of her as part of the thin fabric of my safety net. But even fabric can fray. It began with small absences. She stopped waving as often. She skipped our Saturday chats. And then, one evening when I returned from the mailbox, I noticed a window curtain shifting in her house. She was watching me, but not with kindness. I learned the truth when Samuel came by, his expression grave. "Marjorie," he said, "I heard something strange. Nora mentioned you were slipping. That maybe you shouldn't be living alone?" The words pierced deeper than if he had struck me. Nora's voice had joined the chorus, echoing the lies Darius and Naomi had already spread. She had been feeding them. Worse still, a week later, I discovered a folder missing from my drawer, receipts and copies of old bills I had been saving for Sonia. Days later, they reappeared, but slightly out of order. Sonia confirmed it later. Darius had produced copies and court filings that he should never have had. The betrayal was no longer just within my family. My neighbor had opened the door wider for them. The night I knew for certain, I baked a pie, not as a gift of warmth, but as a test. I left the dish on Nora's porch with a simple note in joy. The next morning, the dish came back to me, empty. Only sugar crumbs clung to the rim, catching the light like shards of glass. No thank you, no knock. Just a silent trade, as if I were still the fool who believed in neighborly trust. I held the dish in my lap for a long while. Betrayal had weight. Even when disguised as something ordinary like an empty plate, it pressed on your chest. That afternoon, I crossed the street. She opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. I handed the empty dish back to her without a smile. "You backed the wrong horse," I said softly. Her eyes widened, but I didn't wait for her reply. I walked away, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a match. Inside, I sat down and wrote in my journal, Day 6. Nora shifted sides. Return dish empty. Trust once broken is never peace the same. The social question gnawed at me. Was her betrayal less severe because she was not family, or was it worse because she had no claim over my life, yet chose to interfere? Do neighbors owe loyalty? Or do we all in the end sell pieces of each other for safety, for money, for belonging? And if I could forgive her, what did that say about the lines I drew with my own blood? The hardest part was Kayla's face when I told her. "Nora too," she whispered. I nodded. She turned away, shoulders shaking. "So who can we trust?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. That evening, Samuel returned. He carried a yellowed envelope, corners bent with age. "Do you remember this?" he asked, placing it on the table. I unfolded the paper inside. An old insurance document dated nearly a decade earlier. My handwriting was in the margins notes I had written when he asked me to check the math. "You caught a mistake that would have cost me thousands," he said. "I never forgot that. And I don't believe for a second you've lost your sharpness now." My throat tightened. Healing rarely arrives in grand gestures. Sometimes it is as small as a neighbor's faith placed back in your hands. His words steadied me. Trust had been shattered by Nora, but Samuel had patched part of the wound. I tucked the insurance paper into my folder of evidence, not because it was proof for the court, but because it reminded me who I was, a woman whose skills had saved others, not the caricature of instability my family painted. Still, the storm grew. Naomi's whispers had turned into full narratives online, their PR firm crafting stories of a spiraling grandma. Photos of me leaving the grocery store, grainy and unflattering, began appearing in comment threads. "Is this woman okay?" strangers asked. "Should someone step in?" I brewed tea late that night, the house quiet except for the creak of wood. The empty pie dish sat on the counter. I stared at it, fingers brushing the rim where sugar still clung. That dish had once been a symbol of shared sweetness. Now it was evidence of silence, complicity, betrayal. The question lingered in my mind, could I forgive Nora? Forgiveness is easy to preach until you hold the crumbs of betrayal in your hands. I thought of William. He had always said, "Don't confuse politeness with goodness." Perhaps I had mistaken her politeness for something stronger. As midnight came, I recorded another entry. The circle is shrinking. Nora is gone from it. Samuel remains. Kayla tries to stand tall, but she is only a child. The law looms, and so does the noise online. But I will not surrender my life as though it were a pie cooling on someone else's windowsill. The next morning, the porch light cut across the street. I looked at Nora's house, curtains drawn, distance cemented. I turned away stronger for naming her betrayal, but softer for recognizing that healing comes not from erasing wounds, but from acknowledging them. I placed the pie dish in the cupboard on the highest shelf, not as a tool of use, but as a reminder. Some vessels look sturdy, yet they carry only emptiness back to your door. And as I sat down to review Sonia's notes for the upcoming court date, Samuel's envelope resting nearby, I repeated the words to myself. They want me erased, but I remain. Not just in memory, not just in papers, but here, present, breathing, unwilling to be silenced. The courthouse smelled of waxed floors and nervous sweat. Every step echoed too loudly, as if the building wanted to remind me how small I was compared to its walls. Yet I held my head level. I wore William's blazer, the one from his funeral, and carried the cracked teacup in my bag, a reminder that fragile things can still endure. When I entered the courtroom, I saw them already seated. Darius in a navy suit, his tie knotted too tightly, sweat darkening the edges of his collar. Naomi beside him in gray hair pulled back into a bun that screamed of control. Their lawyer stacked files like weapons on the desk. Behind them, Kayla sat with her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting between me and her parents. I took my seat beside Sonia Patel. Her presence was a shield, calm, focused, precise. She whispered, "Remember, they need to prove you incompetent. We only need to show the truth." The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the clerk called the case, Carter v. Carter, petition for conservatorship. Hearing my own name divided against itself cut deeper than I expected. Their lawyer rose first. He spoke of love. He spoke of protection. He spoke of children forced by conscience to step in where a mother had failed. He painted me as confused, erratic, prone to mistakes. He said the petition was an act of mercy. I sat still, hands folded, while Sonia scribbled notes. Inside my chest burned. Was this what society had become, that children could drag their parents into court and call it virtue? Was desperation so easily dressed in the robes of morality? When it was Sonia's turn, she stood tall, voice firm. Your Honor, what we have here is not mercy. It is ambition. It is not protection. It is appropriation. and the evidence will show Mrs. Carter is perfectly competent. The first exhibits were the recordings. The clink of my spoon against porcelain filled the silent courtroom. Darius's voice followed Mom sign this. It's not control, it's relief. Naomi's rehearsed reassurances echoed cold, every sound authenticated by the timestamp, every word captured by the hidden lens behind the oregano jar. Darius shifted in his chair, his jaw clenched. Naomi looked down at her lap, but the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. Then came the financial timeline. Sonia laid out my bank statements, receipts, meticulous notes. This is the work of a woman in full control of her faculties, she said. These are not the accounts of someone spiraling. Naomi dabbed her eyes with a tissue, letting out a practiced sob. She forgets things, she said loudly. She left the stove on. She misplaced her keys. We are just trying to help. The judge turned toward me. Mrs. Carter, would you like to respond? I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice did not waver. Your Honor, when I broke my hip, they did not come. When bills piled, I paid them alone. When I tripped in the yard, it was my neighbor Samuel who helped me up. But the moment I won the lottery, they came with pie and paperwork. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Darius shot up. That's not true. His phone left face up on the desk vibrated. The screen lit up with a message preview so large the front row could read it. Final notice. Payment overdue. Contact creditor immediately. The silence was knife sharp. Sonia leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. Darius scrambled to flip it over, but the damage was done. Whispers spread like wildfire. Their petition for my protection now smelled of their own desperation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Carter, control yourself. Sit down. He obeyed, face-pale sweat trickling down his temple. Then something unexpected happened. Kayla stood. Her small voice trembled at first. Your Honor, may I say something? The judge hesitated, then nodded. Kayla clutched her phone, tears in her eyes. I've seen the messages. I've seen them plan. They said if Grandma resisted, they would escalate. I have the screenshots, the real ones. She held out the phone with shaking hands. I felt the room tilt. For weeks, I had feared she was being pulled into their web. Now, in front of everyone, she chose her side. My side. Naomi hissed. Sit down, but Kayla didn't move. The bailiff crossed over and handed her phone to the clerk who delivered it to the judge. He scrolled silently, frowning. The healing I felt in that moment was sharp and bittersweet. Betrayal had been constant, but loyalty, true loyalty, had finally surfaced in my granddaughter's courage. It was not just evidence. It was bloodline refusing to be weaponized. The session continued, a tug-of-war of affidavits and accusations. Their lawyer tried to present a new affidavit claiming I had spent $700,000 recklessly. Sonia pounced. Produce the receipts, she demanded. They could not. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. We will adjourn until tomorrow to review these new documents, he said. Court is in recess. The gavel struck. The echo lingered like thunder. As people shuffled out, I remained seated for a moment. The words of the hearing still rattled in my bones. The image of Darius's phone glowing with his debts, Naomi's crocodile tears, and Kayla, my Kayla, standing tall for the first time. Sonia touched my shoulder. Today was good, she said. Tomorrow we bring it home. I nodded, gripping the cracked teacup in my bag. Betrayal had filled the courtroom, but so had light. And for the first time, I felt the shadow lifting. When I woke that morning, the courthouse felt less like a place of judgment and more like an arena. I knew Darius and Naomi would arrive armed with affidavits, lies, and rehearsed tears. But I carried something different. I carried the truth, and for the first time in my life, I decided the truth would not stay hidden in folders or whispered in chambers. It would live in daylight for the world to see. That choice terrified me. My entire career as an accountant had been about privacy, about protecting sensitive numbers from wandering eyes. And yet now, in the face of children trying to erase me, my ledgers became my armor. Outside the courthouse, a small group had gathered. They weren't protesters in the traditional sense, just people who had read pieces of the story that had leaked. A man held up a piece of cardboard, the words written in thick black marker, "Respect our elders." His handwriting slanted and uneven, but the message was unmistakable. As I walked past, our eyes met. He nodded. That nod steadied me more than any sermon could have. Inside, Sonia whispered, "Are you ready?" I opened my worn leather bag, pulled out the stack of documents, bank statements, receipts, recordings, transcribed everything in order. But this time, instead of handing them quietly to the judge, I had already uploaded them online at dawn. Every cent accounted for, every timeline aligned. The internet was about to become my witness stand. The hearing began. Their lawyer tried again to present me as confused, unstable, a woman adrift. Naomi dabbed her eyes, voice quivering as she said, "We are only trying to protect her from herself." That was the moment I leaned forward. My voice carried calm but sharp. "Your Honor, my children have petitioned to erase me. They say I am incapable of reason. This morning I made my entire financial life public. Every transaction, every dollar. If I am so incompetent, let the world see for themselves." The judge frowned. "Mrs. Carter, are you saying you published your records?" "Yes, Your Honor. At 6 a.m. they went live. Anyone can review them. Transparency is my defense." A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. Darius turned to Naomi, whispering furiously. His face was white, his hands trembling. He knew exactly what was in those statements, what was absent too. No missing millions, no reckless spending. Just order, clarity, and proof that their narrative was false. Their lawyer objected, claiming my actions endangered my own privacy, that it was irresponsible. But Sonia countered instantly. It was her choice, a competent choice. And the fact that she could gather, redact personal identifiers and publish with accuracy only proves her capacity. In that moment, my story was no longer confined to four walls. It was flowing through screens, reaching strangers I would never meet. By midday, my phone buzzed with notifications. Comments poured in. "My mom went through this, too. They tried to take my grandma's house. Stay strong, we are with you." Thousands of voices I didn't know echoed my pain and turned it into solidarity. I sat taller. Betrayal might have stolen my peace, but now community returned a portion of it. Healing came not from forgiveness of those who hurt me, but from recognition by those who understood. Naomi's mask cracked. She muttered under her breath, "She's humiliating us." Darius grabbed his phone, scrolling desperately. I glimpsed a message pop up on his screen, another creditor demanding payment. His debt screamed louder than his lies ever could. The judge called for recess. I stepped into the hallway where that same man with the cardboard sign approached. "Ma'am," he said softly, "thank you for standing up. My sister." They tried to do the same thing to her. She didn't make it to court. His voice broke. I reached out, touched his hand. Then this fight is for her too. Back inside, the air had shifted. The court was no longer just about me versus them. It was about something larger, whether the law could be twisted into a weapon against the elderly, or whether documentation and courage could bend it back to justice. When the judge reconvened, Sonia laid out the updated exhibits side-by-side comparisons of the online records and the alleged affidavit claiming I had squandered $700,000. The inconsistency was glaring. "This is fabricated," Sonia said firmly, "and we can prove it." The judge looked directly at Darius. "Do you understand the consequences of submitting false documents to this court?" Darius stammered, I was misled." Naomi squeezed his arm, but it was too late. The cracks had widened, and the foundation of their case was crumbling in plain sight. I rose again. My knees trembled, but my words did not. "Your Honor, I ask not only that this petition be denied, but that the court recognize what is happening across this country. Families are turning on their elders for money. It is not love. It is not duty. It is exploitation wrapped in affection." The room fell silent. Even the clerk stopped typing for a moment. It was Sonia who broke the pause. Your Honor, Justice is not only about today, it is about precedent. Let the record show that Mrs. Carter defended herself with transparency, with truth, and with dignity. I looked back at Kayla. She was crying quietly, but this time not out of fear. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded. Forgiveness wasn't complete yet, but the bridge was there waiting. The gavel struck, signaling another adjournment. Tomorrow would be final. But today I had already won something more profound than a legal motion. I had reclaimed my voice. As we left the courthouse, the cardboard sign was still there, leaning against a bench. Respect our elders. Its ink had smudged in the afternoon heat, but the message glowed stronger than ever. I paused, lifted the cracked teacup from my bag, and whispered, "We are not broken. We are not disposable. We will be heard." And for the first time, I felt the reckoning wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced by those they trusted most. The morning of the final hearing, I carried the weight of 72 pages. The dossier pressed against my ribs, as if reminding me with every breath that this was my armor. The paper still smelled faintly of ink from the copier. It wasn't just documentation, it was survival bound in staples. Walking into the courthouse, I wondered, is paperwork truly the only weapon left for people like me? We who have spent our lives raising children, burying spouses, building homes, now reduced to proving our worth in black and white lines. That question clawed at me as I tightened my grip on the folder. The courtroom was full. Darius sat rigid, face pale, his phone dark for once. Naomi's eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathy she no longer owned. Kayla sat apart from them now, closer to my side, as if she had already chosen where her loyalty belonged. Sonia leaned toward me, whispering, "Today let the paperwork speak. You don't need to shout, just read." The judge entered robe, sweeping gavel echoing. Court is now in session. His voice carried finality. Their lawyer went first, attempting one last performance. He painted me again as fragile, delusional, manipulated by outsiders. He gestured toward my online transparency as recklessness, a cry for attention. "This is why we petitioned," he said, "to protect her from herself." My chest burned, but I stayed still. I had learned silence builds pressure, and when silence breaks, it is louder than thunder. Finally, it was our turn. Sonia rose, placed the thick file on the podium with a thud that made Naomi flinch. She handed the first copy to the judge, then to opposing counsel. 72 pages, she said clearly. Every transaction, every receipt, every timestamp. Verified, cross-checked, and aligned. This is Mrs. Carter's life. Intact. The judge flipped through the first few pages, brows furrowed. "Mrs. Carter, are you prepared to speak?" I stood knees protesting, but voice steady. I held my cracked teacup in one hand, the pages in the other. "Your Honor," I began. "They didn't come when I broke my hip. They didn't come when bills stacked on the table. But they came now with pie and paperwork." A ripple of recognition moved through the spectators. Some nodded. Some closed their eyes as if hearing their own mothers in my words. I opened the dossier, reading aloud. Page 12, electricity bill paid on time May. Page 21, check deposited from state lottery intact. Page 42, hospital invoice settled. Page 68, donation to community center confirmed. Each word was deliberate, a counterweight against every lie. I did not rush. I let the silence after each page hang heavy, as if the courtroom itself was absorbing proof. When I reached the final page, my throat tightened. 72 pages. Nothing missing. Nothing fabricated. Only the life of a woman who has lived carefully, who is not unstable, who is not disposable. The air shifted. No one coughed. No one shuffled. The silence was not emptiness. It was acknowledgement. It was the sound of dignity finally restored. The judge placed the file down his fingers, lingering as though the paper carried weight beyond ink. "I have reviewed enough," he said firmly. He looked directly at Darius and Naomi. "The petition for conservatorship is denied. Permanently sealed." Naomi gasped, slumping in her chair. Darius's lips moved, but no sound came. Kayla reached for my hand. For the first time in months, I let someone touch me without suspicion. But the silence remained, not the silence of fear or suppression, the silence of recognition, the silence of truth accepted. I sat back exhausted but not defeated. This was not triumph shouted from rooftops. It was quiet justice, the kind that seeps deep, the kind that lasts. The controversy still lingered in my mind. Is paperwork enough? Is it right that elders must fight their own children with receipts and signatures? The thought made my heart ache. But in this moment, those 72 pages were my sword and shield, and they had held. As the gavel struck one last time, the courtroom released a collective breath. Some spectators even clapped softly before the bailiff hushed them. But the sound didn't matter. What mattered was the silence that came after thick, undeniable healing. Walking out, I passed the bench where yesterday's cardboard sign still leaned, the ink fading, but the message immortal: respect our elders. I touched the edge with my fingertips, whispering, "They heard me." Sonia smiled faintly. "They didn't just hear you, Marjorie. They believed you." Outside, the air felt lighter, though my body was weary. I thought of William of the nights we used to balance ledgers at the kitchen table, his pen tapping the rim of that very teacup. He would have smiled at today. He would have said, "Numbers don't lie if you let them speak." And today they had spoken, not just to a judge, not just to children blinded by greed, but to an entire room that fell into healing silence. Silent justice had arrived, and in its quiet I found peace. When the gavel fell for the last time, the courthouse emptied like a river released from a dam. People murmured, whispered, glanced at me, as if I had carried not only my own battle, but theirs as well. I walked out with Sonia on one side and Kayla on the other, but in truth I walked out carrying myself. For the first time in months, I felt whole. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet, some might say. Darius and Naomi disappeared into the shadows of their own choices. Debt collectors called not to me, but to them. Their names no longer carried the sheen of control. And yet I did not chase retribution. I had no desire to gloat, no interest in their downfall. Silent justice had spoken. There was no need for me to add another word. Still, one question pressed on me: is blood the most important bond we have, or is the value we pass on to the world the true inheritance? The answer came not from my children, but from strangers, neighbors who brought me soup, community members who sent letters, women who whispered that they had been through the same. In their voices, I found family where blood had failed. I decided to honor that recognition in a way that would last longer than my own breath. One morning, with the autumn air crisp around me, I met with the director of the community center. Papers spread across the oak table. Not legal petitions this time, but scholarship forms. We signed the foundation into existence the Carter Girls Accounting Scholarship. When the bronze plaque arrived engraved with that name, I ran my fingers across the ridges of each letter. The metal was cold, solid, unyielding. Unlike the fragile bonds of blood, this plaque would not waver, would not betray. It would sit on the wall long after I was gone, declaring that a woman once stood here, and she chose to give rather than be taken from. At the ceremony, Kayla stood beside me, nervous but resolute. She whispered, "Grandma, I want to apply. Not because of the money, because I want to do what you did: keep track, keep honest." My heart swelled with something I thought I had lost. Perhaps healing begins not with forgetting betrayal, but with planting something stronger beside it. The crowd clapped as the cloth was pulled away and the plaque gleamed in the light. I saw my reflection in it, lined, aged, but steady. A reflection that said I had turned grief into something that would outlive resentment. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with the cracked teacup in my hands. The sun was lowering, spilling gold across the boards, painting my skin in warm light. Samuel came by with another jar of honey. He set it down and said, "You gave them something to fight for. You gave us all something." His words sank deeper than he knew. I thought back to William. He had always said legacy was not measured by the size of a bank account, but by what remains useful when you are gone. Sitting there, the scholarship plaque fresh in my mind, I finally understood. My legacy was not just the money, not just the pages of receipts that defended me. It was the message that silence does not mean surrender, that elders do not have to disappear, that community can be thicker than blood. I sipped the tea, bitter but grounding, and let my eyes close for a moment. For months I had fought battles in whispers in courtrooms and sleepless nights. Now I could finally rest. The world outside still carried its noise arguments about whether the elderly should control their own finances, debates on television about conservatorships, headlines flashing across screens. Some called what I did reckless. Others called it brave. I no longer felt the need to answer. Their debates could rage on. My truth was already etched in bronze. As the sun dipped, Kayla joined me on the porch. She curled into the chair beside mine and said softly, "Grandma, I'm sorry for what I posted. I didn't know how deep they were willing to go. I didn't know how strong you were." I placed my hand over hers. Strength isn't about shouting, Kayla. It's about standing when everything tries to push you down. Remember that. Carry it forward. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, and in that moment, I felt something heal inside me. Not the old wound it may never fully close, but a new growth, fragile but alive. The light faded to twilight cicadas, buzzing in the distance. I leaned back, looking at the sky streaked with pink and orange. My voice, calm and certain, rose into the air. Have you ever trusted someone only to realize love was just leverage? Where are you listening from tonight? I imagined the question traveling beyond the porch, beyond the neighborhood, reaching strangers across cities, states, oceans. People who would nod, who would whisper yes, who would find in my story a mirror of their own. That was the true inheritance connection. The cracked teacup warmed in my hand, its flaw now a reminder rather than a wound. I smiled, not the brittle smile of endurance, but the soft smile of release. Silent justice had spoken louder than blood, and as the last rays of sun kissed my porch, I knew it would keep speaking long after I was gone. And that was my story. A story of betrayal, of paperwork, of justice spoken in silence. If it touched your heart, if you saw a piece of your own life reflected here, I ask you to take one small step like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need the reminder that silent justice still exists. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Your voices scattered across cities and countries are proof that none of us stand alone. I read every word you write, and together we are building a community where stories like mine are not buried but honored. Thank you for staying with me through every page, every moment. Until next time, hold your ground, guard your dignity, and remember, sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that echo the longest.